All right, welcome everyone to Apollo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. These are a webinar series that are tailored just for nonprofit professionals. Today, we are focused on the second part of our two-part cybersecurity series. If you weren't able to join us last week, we got a very high-level overview of the cybersecurity landscape and how it's affecting nonprofits. Today, we're going to dive deeper into some more tips and tricks that you guys can use. Before I turn it over to Steve and Garrett, a few housekeeping details. So this webinar is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our website as well as our YouTube channel. However, all of you attending today, you'll receive a follow-up email from me. It'll include the direct link to the recording if you want to go back and review some things. It'll also include the slide deck as well as any resources we might talk about today. Q&A and chat box are available for you to use, so please feel free to use that at any time throughout our conversation today. Really quickly about our mission, about Aparo. So we, I see you, Denise. Yes, the recording will be shared. So Aparo, we are a nonprofit. We're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So what we do is we help other nonprofits with their technology needs. So anything from connecting with vendors to finding tailored solutions to your challenge. So our services range from a variety of different services to help meet your needs. So that it could include one-on-one coaching. It could include getting some guidance on some resources, getting connected with the vendors, like I said before. It could also look like a team training. So if you're looking for maybe a cybersecurity awareness training for your team, that's something that we might be able to offer. As well as finding those tailored solutions. So those are our larger projects where we connect you with volunteers to help make sure you're getting what you're looking for. So the best way to learn more is going to our website at aparo.org. If or when you decide you want to access our resources for those, the best way is to submit that request form and someone will get in contact with you right away. If you're not sure if that's something that we can help with, go ahead and fill that out. But you can also email me and I'll be happy to provide some guidance around that. That is it for me. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to Steve and Garrett.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for having us today, and thanks to everybody for joining. I'm going to quickly introduce myself here shortly, but would the attendees mind writing in the chat kind of who you are, where you come from, what you're doing at your current organization? Just be helpful to help me frame the chat that we're going to have. That'd be really helpful. And like we said at the beginning, like it'd be great just to have your questions in the chat or come off mute. Feel free to blare them out. There's not too many people here today where we get kind of overwhelmed with, sort of putting your hand up and all that. So feel free. That being said, let me share my screen. Can you guys all see what I got going on here?
Yes.
All right, great. I'm just going to move this over, and I won't be able to see the chat or anything as we go. So Yinting and Garrett, if you wouldn't mind interrupting me when the time is right, I'd love that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So my name's Steve Scher. I am the CEO and co-founder of RipRap Security. The other co-founder is Garrett Miller, who you see wave his hand. His Zoom says Steve, but his name really is Garrett, I promise. We started RipRap Security in 2020 as a little bit of a pandemic project, and the idea was to see, can we help bring the expertise that we've gained through our work with the government and our work in industry to organizations like nonprofits, benefit corporations, small businesses, medium businesses that just historically haven't had the access to skills, or they can't really afford these huge consulting companies that do the same sort of similar stuff. And we want to do this because when we work with the government, we really loved working there for the mission. You don't go work for the government to get rich, for sure, but you do go for one of the reasons is to learn a lot about your topic and because you really feel passionate about the mission. And that is really what we wanted to translate to our work with RipRap, is meeting nonprofits and other sort of organizations doing good work in their communities, and for whatever communities that they're in, We want to help them and enable them with security in a way that's appropriate for their size and their security needs, their budgets, and their strategy. So we are, that's kind of how we got started, who we're about. We're a 1% for the Planet member since 2021, just after we got started. So 1% of all, at least 1% of our revenue every year goes to environmental causes, environmental nonprofits here in North Carolina and California, where Garrett and I live, but also more broad projects that nonprofits have across the world. And last month, we were officially certified as a benefit corporation. And the idea behind there is that we have met a certain standard of environmental, social, and governance requirements that with the intention of trying to be a better company for the world and for our communities, for our employees and the customers that we work with. So pretty proud of that. Took a year, but we're there. So that's not why you came here. You came here to learn about platform cybersecurity. So that's what we'll do. We just went through the introductions. Again, if you're just joining, if you wouldn't mind dropping who you are, where you work, a little information about your role in the chat, just to kind of get an idea for kind of where you're coming from and what you're up to. And I can kind of adjust as we go here. But we're going to talk about what are platforms generally, and what is platform security. We're going to talk about why it's important, like why should you even really care. We're going to talk about those platform security best practices, or talk a little bit about our Cybersecurity for Good program, and then open it up for a Q&A. And so the thing that I would hate to have happen is for me to not give you any useful, very concrete examples. So if you need more examples than the examples that I've already planned to give, ask me for them. Because the idea, I gave the next one away. The idea of the presentation is that you can go and in the next week plan to do at least one of these things so you can get to a better place with security. We're all about enablement, taking action, knocking it out, getting it done. All right. So what are platforms and what is platform security? So you all, any computer, any device, any service, any website that you're using, we generally can talk about it as a platform. Since went through the pandemic and we're all increasingly remote or increasingly hybrid, we've been more or less forced or had to adapt to working more online and working with tools and working with these new sets of tools that are coming out and changing very frequently. This is really great for collaboration and working remotely, so I never have to leave my house to do my work, which I love, by the way. But it also, it's a double-edged sword, right? All the things that are great for collaboration they also have security implications. And so, like I say here, with great power comes great responsibility. So we really want to make sure that we're taking steps in each of our core platforms and making sure we're making the right settings changes and thinking about security so that we can keep doing our good work that we're trying to do for the community. That being said, it's all great to talk about making changes. It's another thing to make changes. These platforms often don't make it very easy, which really is pretty lame. We'll provide some resources for some major platforms that we see our customers and other people in the community using. Many of them do have good documentation and good guides and good tools. Some of them is very challenging, which is really unfortunate. So we'll talk about what to do if that happens. And what we're really trying to do is make sure that your data stays secure. Whatever sensitive data you've got, employee data, benefactor data, donor data, data about the people that you're writing grants for, data that you're collecting about government, grants that you're trying to get for your organization to use for your mission. We want to really make sure that you're protecting that data and access to that data so that A, it doesn't fall into the wrong hands and you don't suffer reputational harm, and B, you don't lose that data and you're not in a situation where you're not able to do your job because you don't have access to that data. So I'm going to take a short stop and take a drink. Any questions so far in the chat, or anyone want to come off mute before I continue? Or any other definitions of platform security that anyone would want to share? Cool, nailed it then. Glad I got the slide right. Let's keep going. So here are some reasons we should care. We talked a little bit about these, certainly data protection. Got to keep that sensitive data private and restricted to only the people that need to know it. We have major reputational risks when we're talking about security. If you have to communicate to your donors and sort of beneficiaries that you had a data breach and you lost some money, that's almost certainly going to make them think twice about giving you more money in the future or trying to take money or providing data to you or from you in the future. Certainly there's a usability factor. You know, you not being able to use your email because it got hacked is certainly a big impediment to you doing your work. And the last bit is access control, right? A lot of the things that we can do for platform security are really good for helping improve the way people access data at your organization. So we're talking certainly today focusing on security, but we're going to get a lot of twofers for operational benefits, cost benefits by doing some of these things that we're going to talk about. So it's not just all about security, although we do love it. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month for all of you that are not celebrating with a cake every weekend like me and Garrett. I'm tired of cake, honestly. We're at the end of the month. It's too much, but okay, that's an aside. Obviously, cake problems. All right, why is platform security so hard? The reason is that you sign up for a tool, Slack, Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, whatever you've got. And by default, there's nothing secure about it. There's no requirements, there's no restrictions, there's no limitations, there's no protections, there's nothing. And that's a real big problem, obviously. We don't love to see that. But the reality is that that's the way of the world. And so the other thing we're seeing is that a lot of security features you have to pay more to get, which is really lame. You know, Slack, for instance, they make you pay an additional premium to use something called single sign-on in a lot of their higher tiers. And so, you know, like you were a small, like many of you probably were a small organization, you know, you have to make that balance of like, hey, is it worth the extra money to get the SSO, or am I okay with multi-factor authentication? Or hey, to make these trade-offs. And they don't make it easy. And of course, it costs more money, which stinks. Then we have something called the shared responsibility model, the shared security responsibility model. And the idea here is these tools, when you use them and buy them, Microsoft, Google, Slack, whatever, they say, here are the things, we're going to provide you the service. Here are the things security-wise that we're responsible for. Here are the things that you're responsible for. And here's this little thing in between of things we're both responsible for. And finding the list of those things and who's responsible for what is very hard. And it's often buried in really boring contract stuff, and they don't make it easy. Slack does make it easy. They have a good set of web pages on security. Gotta give them props for that. But it's just very hard to figure out what you have to care about, what the vendor has to care about, and sort of where you got to meet in the middle. The documentation for these services, I got to tell you, is not great in most cases. You know, these tools, they change so often. You know, they're adding features, they're doing all this, these companies are adding all this functionality, but the documentation isn't always as up to date as it could be. So finding the latest and the greatest information about how to configure something securely is often quite challenging. And the last big impediment that we have is coordination of your staff, of your colleagues when you're about to make changes. The worst thing that you can do when you're making changes to security is to just do them in a vacuum and just turn them on and cross your fingers and hope everything is good. A good example of this is multi-factor authentication. For a lot of these services now, like Microsoft 365, Salesforce, Google Workspace, I think Slack now, you can change a setting that says, hey, every user that has an account at my organization with this tool has to set up multi-factor authentication. So that means they have to provide a username, a password, and then a third factor, which is maybe a push notification of your phone. Is it really you logging in from Raleigh, North Carolina? Yes or no? Or say, hey, go on your device and go to your authenticator app and type in the 6 digits on the screen that you see on your mobile device. Or hey, type in the 6 digits we get via text message. These are all multiple factors. And so it's great that you want to go and mandate that, but if you don't give the staff warning that they need to set this up 2 weeks ahead, then a week ahead, hey, don't forget to set this up. And then 3 days ahead, like, hey, Jim, you haven't set it up yet. I really need you to go set it up because you're going to get locked out in 2 days. 2 days is the deadline. Really hand-holding people. You're going to get a lot of angry emails and phone calls when you mandate it. If you're like, oh, I had no idea. I never got to 10,000 emails that you sent to me or the 4,000 Slack messages that you sent. So there's always going to be people like that for sure. But you want to make sure everything is super well coordinated so that if there's a change that's going to affect a user or their workflow, you've planned for it, you've made them aware, and you've helped them prepare for it. So that's a challenge. Now, I will say these are all challenges and reasons is that it's very hard to do this. But the reality is all this stuff is possible. You can do this stuff. Just takes a little reading, a little time, a little preparation when you're doing it. So, any questions so far before we start digging into this? Any lived experiences to share about why it's been hard for you to do some of these things in the past? All right, cool. All right, next slide. Platform security for productivity suites. So I think I can't see anybody, but raise your hand if you use productivity suite like Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, maybe even Zoho Office. It'll basically be everybody, I think. It's hard to do any business without some of these tools. They're very easy to use. They're very cheap. Well, they're not always easy to use. I won't say that, but there are good ways to collaborate with your teams remotely and hybrid in person. However, these are major areas where organizations have their critical data living. This is the way that they're doing a lot of their communication with their colleagues, with their donors, with their beneficiaries, with their third parties that support them. And so this is a very frequently targeted sort of part of your technology platform that gets targeted by attackers. And they know this because they know your Microsoft 365 has your email, has your SharePoint, has your OneDrive, has all your documents. You've got hopefully not social security numbers and credit card numbers stored there, but a lot of cases there are. And so attackers are specifically looking to get access to these kind of productivity suites because it's a great bang for their buck and saying, hey, what can we get out of this organization and how can we use it to do more bad stuff to other good people? So like we talked about, the power and the functionality is a double-edged sword. It's very easy to share a link in SharePoint to somebody from outside your organization, but it's also easy to share a link to someone to a document that's full of sensitive information about your donors or about your social media approach or with credentials and passwords in it. It's very easy. So we want to be really careful. So what are some things that we can do? Top items are mandating that multi-factor authentication. We talked a little bit about that as an example in the last couple slides ago. And multi-factor authentication and making it mandatory for these productivity suites is absolutely the number one best thing that you can do that costs zero money, except for a little bit of time spent. It's rolling it out to protect your organization. Now, certainly there's ways for attackers to get around multi-factor authentication. They can be really clever, or there's a lot of interesting techniques that are very nitty gritty. We could talk about after the session if you want to dig into it with us. But this is the best way to do it, right? Protect those accounts, because if you don't have this multi-factor turned on, an attacker is going to get in. We worked with a commercial company in the Western United States recently. They had a series of business email compromises. And what the attacker did was gain access to 3 of the top executives. So the CFO, the CEO, and the CEO. They watched the communications from those 3 high-ranking individuals, and they were watching for how the invoices for contractors and third parties are issued to the company and paid by the company. And so essentially the attacker was preparing, and they said, okay, I am going to find a form that has the bank account information from a known contractor the company already works with in a legitimate way, and I'm going to change the bank account information. So he just went into Microsoft Word on the SharePoint, got the file, edited it as the CEO or the COO's account because he had that access, made those changes. And what he did was the attacker pretended to be that company, issued the victim company an invoice, and did it multiple times to the tune of almost $3 million before they finally realized that there was a problem. Now they were able to get a lot of that back through some fancy pants financial network investigation stuff with the government and police and all that. But the reality is this didn't have to happen. They didn't have to go through that whole thing. If they just had mandated that multi-factor authentication got turned on, they just wouldn't have had the situation. So you can save yourself a lot of hassle and a lot of money, a lot of gray hairs. The ones that I do have are from situations like this, where customers aren't doing these things. We have to go in and help them and sort of be the fire department that puts the fire out, puts the cyber fire out or whatever. And no one needs that. No one needs more gray hairs, right? I think. So turn on multi-factor, please. Just please do it. The next thing to do is to really restrict how external file sharing is done. Now, what we usually recommend is that because you'd have to be able to share files within your organization, with outside your organization, is to create a couple of different SharePoint sites or individual Google Drives that have information for just inside to only share with those people inside your organization, and then an external set of folders or an external SharePoint site for those things that need to be publicly accessible, so that you're not crossing streams, you're not trying to share potentially sensitive information from that internal sort of only don't share outside group or folder structure. And so what you can do is you can configure access controls for these folders, these SharePoint sites, to say, hey, don't allow anyone to share files from this SharePoint site or this specific Google Drive to anyone that's outside of the organization, because this is where like most sensitive stuff lives. All the HR information, all the finance stuff, all the information on, where we're sending payments and how we're storing invoices. Keep that all in a nice protected area that only people from your organization can gain access to. And have this other one, it's kind of a free-for-all. Let the marketing people go crazy. Let the marketing people do what marketing people do. Get the word out and put all the stuff that needs to be public over there and whatever else needs to be public as well. So that's what we definitely recommend. Now, the next thing, not a sexy sort of topic, but a thing that can save you a ton of money and improve your security, is to review who has access to your productivity suite. We worked with a customer about 9 months ago, and we were a Google Workspace customer, and we were doing just an initial review to say, hey, what's the grades or sort of A to F of your security of your Google Workspace, and let's identify some ways that you can quickly improve your security. A little bit like we're talking now, but we're doing some in-depth analysis. So I download the list of all the users that have access, all the users that have been deactivated or deleted, and I'm kind of just looking through dates and it's just a spreadsheet, right? Name, email address, and the date they're last active. So I'm scrolling, and it's like whatever, spring of 2023, right? And there's people that have active accounts that haven't logged in since 2016, and you're thinking, oh no, like maybe it broke, like maybe they have a different address. And so call the person in charge that we're working with on the assessment, and they're like, no, that person hasn't worked here since 2016. And I'm like, you've been paying Google whatever, $7.99 or $8, whatever the amount per month since 2016. I mean, that's so much money that they wasted. And that wasn't the only one. There's probably another 10 or 11 accounts that they've been paying for since like 2017, 2018. They're in the same situation. So save yourself some money if that's not a driving factor for you to look at. I don't know what is, and help yourself with the security, and just review those lists. And that'll be the same recommendation I have for any of your critical services. Stop paying these vendors for seats you're not using, and improve your security while you're doing it at the same time. Also a great sort of win to report up to your leadership of like, hey, I actually saved $1,000 all next year because I turned off the access for all these people who haven't worked here in years. So easy win, doesn't take long to do, and a nice easy thing to proclaim it as a win. All right, so the next thing you can do is configure backups. Backups are important for all kinds of reasons. We worked before Garrett and I set up RipRap Security. I worked for a larger consulting company in Germany, and we responded to an incident at a company that they do some manufacturing of some tools. Some like physical tools made of aluminum. They did manufacturing for with like metal presses. It was pretty cool and sort of business network they had, and every device had ransomware on it. Couldn't access any files. Their production floor was down. They couldn't make the tools. Everything was not great. Everybody was unhappy. There was not a smile in the room ever at all. So, but the IT guy, when we got there, was like, no problem. I got backups. And he's like, I'll be right back. So he gets in his car, he drives away, comes back. He's got 2 lunchbox sized containers, metal, sort of like tin containers. And he opens them up and he pulls out these tape drives. And for anybody who's been around a while, maybe tape drives used to be a great way to store a ton of data for a relatively cheap amount of money. And so like, great, this is awesome. Like it's very rare to come and help an organization who's been hacked that has backups. It's just so rare, unfortunately. And so I'm like, great, like, let's get started. We've contained the attacker. We've kicked him out. We've started cleaning up. Please go restore the data to the system so you can get everything back working. Just going to take a quick drink. So he comes to me about 20 minutes later. He's like, we got a problem. So, okay, what's going on? He says, at this rate, we're not going to be able to restore all the data from this backups and get back up and running for another month. Because the great thing about tapes is that they're cheap and store a lot of data, but the downside is they're crazy slow. It's really not fast to get the data off those tapes and back to the systems that they need to restore the data to. So I said, okay, well, that's not good. So we communicate that to the executive team, and they're like, all right, we're gonna pay the ransom because it costs us less money to pay the €500,000 in ransom than it will to be out of production for our physical products for a whole month. And so that's an expensive lesson to learn, €500,000 lesson that they could have avoided through not only backing up their data, which they were doing, but also testing that the data was able to be restored in a way and in a time frame that was acceptable to their use case and their needs. So set up backups. These are systems that you can go out and find online that you should definitely do your own research and find a good spot for you. But there's a ton of these tools that you pay a certain amount per month for each user. You configure it. They're usually not very hard to configure. It backs up your data at least 3 times a day for every user, for every SharePoint, and you can restore that data usually within minutes with a couple of clicks. So yeah, it's an expense, but the amount you're investing in these ongoing backups is going to help you when you have an incident, because it may not be ransomware, right? It could be some employee who's not very happy who permanently deletes all your data from your SharePoint or his computer or their accounts before they are fired or before they quit. So it's not just all about the attacker. It's about, hey, we got a plan for when stuff can go down and when our data may not be available. So definitely set those up. It doesn't take long. I mean, when we onboard this technology for customers, we can have them up and running with this technology in like 15 minutes. It's so quick. So I think the cost benefit is definitely there. All right. The next thing to consider after you've done those handful of things that are relatively inexpensive or free is spend more time digging into the vendor security recommendations. Now, I did say that the documentation for a lot of these tools and these capabilities is not so great, and that is often true. But Microsoft, much to their credit, I would not have said this to you 5 years ago, but much to their credit, they built this tool called the Microsoft Security Baseline Tool. And the idea is that if you're a Microsoft 365 customer and you type in security.microsoft.com and log into your account, as long as you're the administrator, it will give you recommendations on features to turn on and configuration changes to make to improve the security of your Microsoft 365 sort of service. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to go read through, see what happens. And like for a lot of these, it's just like a one-click thing to turn on these capabilities that it's a low effort, but they're not on by default because Microsoft doesn't want to do that. So definitely check that out if you're a Microsoft customer. If you're a Google customer, on the other hand, they have a couple of documentation links, one for small businesses that are sort of 1 to 100 size, and then for larger organizations that are like 101 plus. And both of those give varying levels of sort of security recommendations saying, hey, mandate multi-factor authentication, prevent external sharing of data from specific folders and files. Some of the stuff we talked about already today. And you just go through that list. It's time consuming and it takes some time, but take an hour a week to go kind of stroll through these guides and see what improvements you can make. And one area that we're finding that a lot of organizations need help with is email security settings. So if you ever heard of PKIM, DMARC, SPF, these are all configuration settings you do within your email and with your DNS settings to help, number one, help other email services verify that the emails from your organization are legitimate, and B, provide some basic security checks that emails being sent to your organization are legitimate and mark the ones that are not. And what it also gets us, besides the security benefits, is that working and improving this often drastically improves the email deliverability for all the emails you send. So we have organizations that see like a 20% increase in email deliverability after we work on them with this, because they fix these settings and they're getting through, their emails aren't getting caught by spam filters at their donors or their beneficiaries. And that's a huge gain. I mean, 20% of 10,000 possible contacts in their Salesforce is so many people. So don't leave don't leave potential money on the table or contacts on the table, and check it out. Any questions about that while I take a little drink of water?
Steve, are you going to cover platform with the AI coming onto all these platforms? Are you going to be speaking about that at
Yeah,
all?
let me address that. Let me address that now.
Okay, so the question is, how about all the platforms using AI features? So this person had sat through a webinar on Zoom and their AI features. It's exciting, but what security things do we need to check that are in place for these features that are added?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that question. We get this one a lot. Or we get this one increasingly over the last few months, certainly. The reality is you need to read the fine print. With the user agreements that these organizations are updating as they're building in AI features, you want to know how they're using your data. There's a common one is ChatGPT by the OpenAI group. And their big thing is like, feel free to use this tool, but anything you put in, we can use to train our AI model. And anything you use could be potentially presented to other users in some sort of like mixed up way. So you want to be really, really clear on how those tools are using it, because having access to a free tool is not really free. That might not cost you any money, but you're potentially disclosing some sensitive information. And we've seen some incidents. I think, Garrett, was it Samsung that
With
had,
Samsung.
yeah, one of their engineers was trying to improve the code of that they were using to work on a new operating system for their mobile devices. And some security researchers actually were able to get ChatGPT to display that code, which is very proprietary and very problematic from a security perspective, because an attacker could use that to write custom malware for that device that impacts that code that they otherwise would never have access to. So what you put in may come out to somebody else. In the case of Zoom, really cool technology. You may have seen in the news in the last couple of months as they were like very excitedly sharing all these like really cool badass AI features are going to help like take notes and help you like boost your efficiency and all that. But there was some interesting fine print that said we can keep and record and use your information that we record in a lot of weird ways. It's not how they put it. There was some actual lawyer wrote that, I'm sure, somewhere. But then there was this big backlash on the internet and with users and privacy advocates that said like, this is crazy. Like who would use this, get like knowing this? I mean, unless you're like some kind of like super transparent organization, but even then you're having sensitive discussions on Zoom. They've backtracked since then, certainly. They've updated their privacy language to be a lot more prescriptive. Say, hey, we're using it for these things. Here's the limitations. We're not going to do X, Y, Z, and we only use it for these things. So please read the fine print, and don't expect that anything that says it's free is actually going to be free. Any follow-ups for that? Excuse me.
And that's I'll let you know.
Cool. And that's not to say be scared of it and like never use it, because we use it all the time. Like we're using it to automate, to help us develop scripts and automation for our business that are just like making the boring stuff that we do for like administration and all this other stuff like just very easy and very quick in a way that would have taken me a really long time to just kind of figure out, hammer out myself. So don't not use it. Just be smart about how you're using it and how you're telling your staff to use it.
All right, a couple follow-ups. So we have one, what are the more safe platforms?
In terms of AI, I guess. Kara, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, AI.
Again, the privacy assurances that we've seen, some of these companies update, the updates to the privacy policies that we've seen from some of these companies in recent months, have started to make a lot of these AI add-ons for some of these products a lot safer. What we try to do internally at RipRap Security is we just try to make sure that whatever we're using, whatever AI tool we're using, that we're not ever putting any sensitive customer or internal data. in those tools. We do try to review those privacy policies, but if it's something that like if there's some script I'm writing to automate some task, I will make sure to redact any sensitive or client or internally specific information before putting it in there. So it's tough for me to say that any one platform, AI platform, or any one AI product is going to be necessarily better from a data privacy perspective or not. I would just recommend that you use caution in what you're actually putting into these engines, and as Steve said, review the fine print before you do.
Along
Yeah.
with that, the other question is, don't the AI tools allow you to remove your data from the models? I believe ChatGPT and Bard offer this option, but you may have to do it on a regular basis.
Yeah,
So I believe ChatGPT, you can remove your chat history, but I believe that does not remove any of the data that you have previously put into the tool that it will then use as part of its training data going forward. I believe they're planning to launch an enterprise tier of that product. I don't know if they've done it or not, where you can get an assurance from OpenAI that none of the data that you put in there will go to train any of their models. Again, don't know if that's launched yet or not, but I think that is something that is coming.
Yeah, and you typically will pay for that, sort of that pay for the pleasure of having your data be a bit more secure. So yeah, good question though. Any other questions we should chat through now, or should we forge ahead?
I think we can go ahead.
Okay. All right, so the next up are CRMs, customer relationship managers, or I think that's the acronym, but these are tools like Salesforce and HubSpot, and certainly there's a whole ecosystem of nonprofit focused CRMs that are out there. We've met some of them when we go to nonprofit conferences like N10 and the FOG conference for community foundations. And we love CRMs. We use them to keep track of everything because you can't possibly keep everything in a spreadsheet anymore. They're great for automations and integrations. But the more that you integrate things with your CRM, the larger your sort of security world gets. So the top things for here are to mandate MFA. Salesforce now requires that as of February of 2021 or 2022. I can't remember. We did some projects with customers to mandate that. I think HubSpot was not far behind in requiring that, maybe sometime in the last year. And hopefully some of the other smaller tools are following suit and requiring that. But you really want to make sure that that data is secure because, you know, they may not be able to sell that data, like the contact information that you've got, but what the attackers are going to do is they're going to take that information, pretend to be you, and try to convince you people that you have in the CRM to click on links and send money and try, and they're gonna play your role essentially and try to co-opt the trust you've built with each of those people in the CRM to do something bad. So it really is important to make sure that you're following these sort of best practices. Now, some of the tools like Salesforce in particular, you know, I'm not a big fan of Salesforce just because it's just so complicated and pretty expensive. But they do have a very useful security assessment tool that's built in. It's deep down in the settings, but it's possible to find. And it will give you, you say, hey, check my security now, and say, here's a list of 50 things that you can do to improve the security. Step through them. They give you, just in a sort of similar way that Microsoft Security Center gives you recommendations and guidance on how to do it. They'll also do the same. They'll link you out to help and support articles and say, hey, here's how you mandate MFA. Here's how you renew your certificate. Here's how you do XYZ to mitigate the findings that you came up with. Now, the last thing we recommend, sort of the top item in the top items category, is do this access review. Well, just like we talked about for Google Workspace and Microsoft 365, make sure you're not paying for licenses because these are even more expensive than the productivity suite licenses in most cases. And there's just a lot of sensitive information in there. And we find a lot of times that there's a lot of old accounts that exist for third parties that maybe have been brought in to help with like marketing or, you know, sort of fundraising automation or to help improve the workflows in HubSpot and Salesforce. A lot of nonprofits are doing this, which makes sense. We do it also. Have third parties help us with some of this stuff because I don't need to spend my time like learning like in depths of Salesforce, right? And so we find that these user accesses aren't getting cleaned out when the engagements end. And you really want to make sure that you do, because the first thing an attacker is going to do when they breach maybe a marketing agency or some kind of technology provider that's integrating things with your Salesforce is they're going to look to see what other organizations they can gain access to, because they gain access to that third party. So they're going to say, hey, great, marketing agency A has access to like 10 different Salesforce accounts, and we're going to do that same trust-based attack and get all the information that we need and really do more bad stuff to people, which is really not great. So you really got to be careful with this third-party account accesses. Now, the other big area, talking about third parties, is all around integrations. And so CRMs are great, but they're rarely great like in isolation. We find there's a lot of integration with Slack and Teams and email and not payroll, but invoicing organizations and quoting tools and whatever. There's 10,000 integrations for Salesforce, I'm sure, that are out there at least. Depending on the level of the integration, these third-party tools that have access often have very, very large and high amounts of access. We call these sort of like God level access that has just the ability to do and see do a lot of things and see a lot of data. And so we want to really be careful that we want to make sure we can trust the integrations that are there. So we're not just willy-nilly installing integrations with tools we have no experience with or don't really actively use or really don't have a reason to trust. And we want to make sure that we're still using the integrations so that there's not just data flowing in and out of our Salesforce or whatever the CRM we have out to QuickBooks, which we may no longer use, or out to, I don't know, whatever third-party integration that exists. So you want to be really careful. And it takes a lot of coordination. It's like, hey, on Slack, it's like, is anybody using these 10 integrations? And people are like, I don't know, it was set up like 10 years ago. How would I know? So it takes a little bit of more in-depth analysis, but it's really important to do that. And the other point we'll mention here is just evaluate the need for backups in the same way that you back up your, sort of like productivity suite data. It may also make sense for you to back up your CRM data to a third party, just to make that really easy for you, because so many of our customers and people we talk to, like so much of their critical data is in those Salesforce instances or HubSpot or whatever. So have a look at that. Any questions on that? All right. Everyone's next favorite topic, except for AI, is social media security. Maybe not second favorite, probably 10th favorite, I would imagine. Obviously, your social media gets hacked, you've got big reputational risks and exposure there, and the same kind of like trust-based attacks that that we talked about for those other use cases. You don't ever want somebody to co-opt your Facebook or your LinkedIn and say, hey, we have this great new fundraising campaign. We're trying to raise money to build houses for people and put food in their mouths, and click here to this Stripe account or PayPal and donate money, please, by the end of the week. So if that's not you, you're not A, getting those dollars, and B, like, you lose a lot of trust from your customers. And they're very, very hard to get access back to. In the cases we've worked with, we have to like know a friend of a friend of a friend that works at LinkedIn to help us get connected with the right people in the customer service to help restore the account. It really sucks to have to do that. And it's really hard for people to do that. It takes a long time. So we recommend require MFA. These services there's almost no option to mandate it, which is really unfortunate. So for some of the accounts like LinkedIn, you might have you're basically forced to have a personal LinkedIn account for yourself, and then for your personal account to get added to be sort of like a manager of your organization's account. At least that's how ours works, right? So there's no way for me to require that anyone with access to the RipRap LinkedIn account to have multi-factor authentication, although I think LinkedIn is now requiring it. So maybe this is not a great example, but some of the other accounts or social media sites are in this situation. So you really need to make sure that anyone that has access to your site, you're sitting down with them and you're verifying that they have multi-factor authentication set up, because this is your main point that you're able to protect your account with, is through protecting their personal account. We also recommend drastically limiting the access of your social media platforms to as few people as possible. We never recommend just one because if one person gets sick or they get lost or they lose their device or something, you may get locked out. So have maybe 2 or maybe 3 at the most, but you don't really need more than that probably. And for those social media accounts that are shared, like Twitter is maybe a good example where it's hard to delegate access to personal accounts, and maybe you have to share an organizational account, get a password manager. Put that password for that Twitter account in a shared separate vault that only certain people that need the access have the access to. And if you have a compromise of that Twitter account, change the password, update in the password manager, everyone's life goes on and everything's okay. So those are top recommendations there for social media security. All right, website security. This is a big one we're finding. It's really a challenge. A lot of nonprofits, especially the real small ones we talk to, they work with small organizations, maybe in a pro bono situation, or they work with a university student. And the reality is a lot of these small shops, even the big ones, these big marketing and sort of communications agencies and public relations agencies, like they don't know anything about security. And that's a real shame because they're managing a lot of these resources for a lot of organizations. And so when we see one site get hacked, we almost always have to go and ask, who's the person operating and building your website? And we have to go talk to them and tell them, hey, there's a chance that all of the rest of your customers are also affected because the hack may have originated at that third-party marketing company. So it makes it way more complicated. The reality is you need to have a conversation with your web developer and your hosting provider, if they're 2 separate organizations, about security, figure out what your responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are, and what your shared responsibilities are. You want to ask them questions of like, who's installing updates on the website? So let's say if you're using WordPress, you have to very often update WordPress and the plugins that you use for WordPress, because attackers know that, like, I don't know, Garrett, is like 20% of the internet's websites are like run on WordPress or something obscene, right? Some insanely high amount of websites run on WordPress. And so hackers are like, cool, that's a huge chunk of the web that's using this technology. We're going to research the heck out of it and find all the vulnerabilities and exploit them. So they're focused on this, and platforms like WordPress. So figure out who's supposed to install the updates, because the answer is usually like, well, that ain't my job. You're not paying me for that, and that's not a good, it's not a great answer, obviously, but you really need to figure out who's going to do that and that it's going to happen on the regular. And it needs to happen basically on an ongoing basis, right? We're doing daily and weekly checks for vulnerable like websites for our customers, because the vulnerabilities can be identified very quickly and exploited very quickly and taken advantage by attackers. We also recommend setting up dedicated accounts for admin tasks. So have an administrative account that can make changes to the site. But if you have the need to actually also be a user on your website, like if you have this type of like interactive site, like some organizations have a second account that is where you do most of your work, unless you're the website administrator. And having the separation of accounts gives you separation of duties, and it makes it less likely for someone to like take advantage of one of the accounts, the lower privilege account, and do bad things with it, because they won't have the access. And just please turn on MFA where it's possible. All right, we're coming on home. 2 slides left. Promise you that we're there. We're doing okay on time. Public cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, DigitalOcean. There's all manner of these cloud providers that make it really easy to stand up services and apps and websites in the cloud, which is great. But the configuration of these services is not easy. It's not straightforward. And it almost always requires you to know the person, to have someone that really knows what they're doing to design the security for you, so that you're not just letting your data walk right out the door. So, because we see just a ton of unauthorized access and data loss. I mean, when you see these big pipeline breaches and hospital breaches, it's their AWS accounts that are getting hacked, and the attackers are using that access to get back into their organization, and they're just stealing data left and right. And it's mostly due to misconfigurations, not for organizations not really using the built-in security tools that the AWS and the GCP people are offering. And so unless you have someone that knows what they're doing and is actively monitoring for attacks, like, you're going to potentially be in a pretty bad spot. So Follow vendor guidelines. There's something called, for AWS, there's something called the Amazon Well-Architected Framework. They have a lot of good best practices and guidelines that you can follow, that you should make sure you're asking your third-party provider that's putting these services on for you or for yourself. And bring on a third party to make sure things are secure. Have an independent group come in and do an assessment of your cloud security, because this is just this is one of the few things that I'll talk about in the session today that it requires like really people who know what they're doing. Like we have specific people that on our team that just focus on this because it's so deep and requires such deep expertise to really get right. So you don't see me doing that kind of work. I'm more of a strategy guy. So we have people just dedicated for that. So keep that in mind. So I'm about to open up for questions, so prepare yourselves. I'm just going to briefly mention, so I mentioned that we're a certified benefit corporation from last month. As a part of that program, we've agreed to spend 5% of all of our time each year, 5% or more, on pro bono support to nonprofits and other organizations who need the help. This is one of those, it counts towards our commitment that we have. But what we've realized, and this is kind of aligned with what we talked about at the beginning, is like, it's just so hard to find good information about this, that it's not like, here's a little bit of information, now buy our tool, or here, buy our tool, and then we'll tell you the secret sauce. And so we thought that was pretty not great. So what we've done is we built a course, an online course. It's not very long. There's no sales pitch, not a single one in there. All we're trying to do is help people. We're trying to provide tips, tricks, checklists, to-do lists, like really actionable stuff, similar to what we talked about today, but with more resources and more access to help you start building a strong cybersecurity foundation. So we have the course, and then as you need help, you run into questions or say, hey, what about this? What about AI? What about if I tried this? We have the ability for you to sign up for free sessions. We just do a half hour at a time. We say, hey, let's talk about this problem that you're having, and we'll help you troubleshoot and give you some guidance there. So you have a human being helping you, like Garrett and I, through some of this as well. So you're not just like doing it on your own. So check it out. It's totally free. There's no sales pitch. We just meet at the beginning so I can know who you are, that you're not just some random person trying to hack our customers or something. We get to know you and we get you enrolled, and it's like a 15-minute conversation that we have, and we get you on your way. And it counts towards our pro bono support for the B Corp thing. So check it out, sign up for it. It doesn't take that long to go through, but it's got checklists and templates, and just to get you started, or to validate that you're doing the right things, if you're already going down this path. So I'm going to stop talking. You probably are waiting for me to stop talking. So I'm going to stop talking. Any questions that we can verbalize here in the last few minutes to talk through?
Yes. So we have a question around password manager. So do you have any password manager recommendations? I know there is one within Microsoft Authenticator, but wanted to see if you know of any others worth looking into.
Yeah. So we have seen a lot of password managers. Password managers, they're very frequent targets of attack, just like WordPress and some of these other sites are. So you may find password managers that have had a series of incidents. So recently there was LastPass. I used to use that one personally for my family. It was hacked a few months ago, and it was clear from the incident response and the sort of like public information they were releasing that they weren't really good stewards of my passwords, and they really weren't doing the right things. That being said, I tend to recommend 1Password. They've, they don't have a perfect track record either, but it tends to be a really good bang for the buck. They also have a nonprofit discount, nonprofit program. I think they call it like Passwords for Good or something similar to that. Check them out. We have another customer that uses Dashlane that quite likes it. We see there's a lot out there, but test them out. Do some Google searches and Google News or whatever your favorite news site, and search for their name of the password manager company that you're looking for, and see what comes up, and try to figure out kind of like what direction, and hey, like, can we trust this tool? Does it seem like it's going to be a good steward of our sensitive information? Great question.
Another question, what is the difference between app-based 365 applications versus accessing the web base around security?
Yeah. So Garrett, do you want to take that one? My voice needs a little break.
Sure. Certainly. Honestly, These days, there's little difference. Most desktop applications that are deployed on computers nowadays are actually just a web browser in disguise. So, for example, if you download the newest Microsoft 365 version of Microsoft Outlook, the window that pops up is actually just a little web browser, and then there's a little web application running inside that application that looks like a desktop application. So from a security perspective, there's little difference nowadays. I guess one thing to consider is one thing with web browsers is that new vulnerabilities emerge in them all the time. You probably see that Google Chrome updates like once or twice a week. We still really like Google Chrome, but again, being an extremely popular browser, it's much like WordPress, it's an extremely high value target. And there's lots of people researching vulnerabilities and trying to develop exploits for it all the time. So the only major recommendation I would make is if you're using these desktop applications, just make sure that they're updating regularly. I think in their default configurations, they will. If it's being installed on Microsoft Windows, I think the Windows Store, your organization's endpoint management tool should keep those up to date for you. Similar thing on Mac OS, if you install it through the Mac OS App Store, Mac OS will keep all of that stuff up to date. So just keep the software on your computer up to date, and that's probably the biggest security consideration about having those tools installed on there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Garrett. And great question.
Great. Just a comment through a Q&A TechSoup. If you aren't already, please register for that. There's a lot of great discounts, including Dashlane, which was one of the recommended password managers. Let's see. Any other questions?
If you think of a question afterwards, you can go to our website and just schedule some time with us. We're always happy to talk and chat about whatever security concerns that you've got, point you in the right direction. You know, if we try to point you to the free, easy to do stuff as much as we can. And we just tell you up front of like, hey, this is a larger effort that's going to need some more expertise. So we're not hard selling you. We're not business people. We're just cybersecurity people who want to do good stuff for the community. So that's kind of how we approach things. So if you have questions, let us know. We really want to help and be a resource.
Appreciate that. One interesting question around storage. So question is, what information should not be on storage and what information can be on storage?
When you say storage, what do you mean?
Documents, like documents to file storage.
Oh, file storage. Yeah, I mean, I think the increasing amount of sensitivity of the data that you'd like to put somewhere dictates a higher level of security controls that you put in place. So storing a bunch of social security numbers in a folder that everybody in your organization can access, definitely a bad idea. So, you know, creating a separate folder and restricting the access to that folder and establishing other controls for that folder or those files goes a long way. And that's one of the things we often are helping customers with is like, how do we really make sure that just the finance people have access to the sort of like W-9s and the W-2s that people are submitting to get, you know, their payroll and get the contractors paid, and make sure the executives only have access to like just the stuff they need and not everything, because they're often big targets for attackers. So you can definitely check out the documentation for whatever tool that you got to learn how you can apply these access controls to particular files or particular documents.
Well, we are at 1 o'clock. Thank you, Steve, Garrett, for this amazing presentation. I definitely learned a lot of new things. So really appreciate both of you. Everyone else, you will receive a follow-up email from me. Steve, it's okay, you can send me that deck so I can share it with them. So I'll include the link to this recording as well as a slide deck. I wrote down some of the resources that Steve and Garrett shared, so I'll be sure to include that as well. If you do want to learn more or want to connect with them, just let me know and I'll happy to make that warm transfer. Other than that, thank you again to both of you and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks very much for having me. See you all later.